Sarah Martinez had always been the best detective in the city police force. For 12 years, she solved cases that others couldn't even understand. Her desk was covered with thank you letters from families whose loved ones she had found. Her wall displayed awards and certificates that most officers could only dream of earning. But none of that mattered now as she sat in her empty apartment, staring at the termination letter that had arrived 3 days ago. The Thompson kidnapping case had been her downfall. 8-year-old Emma Thompson had vanished from her backyard on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. The case had consumed Sarah's life for 6 months. She worked 18-hour days, followed every lead, and interviewed hundreds of people. Her team had supported her at first, but as weeks turned into months with no breakthrough, their enthusiasm began to fade. Detective Mike Rodriguez, her partner for 5 years, was the first to turn against her. During the final team meeting, he had stood up and pointed his finger at her. "Sarah's obsession is making us all look bad," he had said. "She's chasing ghosts while real crimes go unsolved." The other detectives nodded in agreement. Captain Williams, who had once called Sarah his best officer, remained silent as her colleagues tore apart her methods and dedication. The breaking point came when Sarah discovered a connection between Emma's disappearance and a series of similar cases from other states. She had spent her own money to travel and investigate these cases. She found patterns that the official databases had missed. But when she presented her findings to the team, they laughed at her. "You're seeing things that aren't there," Detective Johnson had said. "This is why we need fresh eyes on this case." Captain Williams had called her into his office the next morning. His desk was clean except for a single folder. "Sarah, I'm sorry, but I have to remove you from the Thompson case," he had said without looking at her. "The family has lost confidence in our investigation. They've specifically requested that you be replaced." Sarah felt like the ground was falling beneath her feet. "But Captain, I'm closer than ever to finding Emma. Give me 2 more weeks." He shook his head. "The decision is final. Take some time off." But Sarah couldn't take time off. Emma Thompson was still out there, and Sarah knew she was the only one who truly understood the case. She continued investigating on her own time, using her own resources. She visited the locations where the other missing children had last been seen. She interviewed witnesses that the official investigations had overlooked. She created a timeline that connected all the cases together. Her unofficial investigation led her to a man named Vincent Crawford. He was a maintenance worker who had access to multiple locations where children had disappeared. Sarah spent weeks watching him, documenting his movements, and building a case. When she was ready to make her move, she called Captain Williams. "I need backup at the old warehouse on 5th Street, she said. "I've found Emma Thompson." But instead of sending backup, Captain Williams told her to stay away. "You're no longer on this case, Sarah. Come back to the station immediately." Sarah made the biggest mistake of her career that night. She went to the warehouse alone. Vincent Crawford was there with Emma and 2 other missing children. Sarah managed to call for backup, but by the time other officers arrived, Crawford had escaped. The children were safe, but the main suspect was gone. Instead of being treated as a hero for saving 3 children, Sarah was suspended for conducting an unauthorized investigation. The internal investigation that followed was brutal. Her former teammates testified against her, claiming she had become unstable and unreliable. They said she had put the children in danger by acting without proper support. The media picked up the story, painting Sarah as a rogue cop who had lost her mind. The Thompson family, instead of thanking her for finding their daughter, criticized her for letting Crawford escape. The final blow came when Vincent Crawford struck again. 3 weeks after the warehouse incident, another child disappeared. This time, Crawford was more careful. He left no traces, and the official investigation found nothing. The police department blamed Sarah for making Crawford more cautious. "If she had followed proper procedures, we would have caught him the first time," Captain Williams told the press. Sarah's termination hearing was a formality. Her union representative barely defended her. Her former partner, Mike Rodriguez, gave testimony that destroyed any chance she had of keeping her job. Detective Martinez became obsessed with this case to the point where she lost touch with reality, he said. She put civilians and fellow officers at risk with her reckless behavior. The hearing board didn't even deliberate for an hour before announcing their decision. Sitting in her apartment now, Sarah felt more alone than she had ever felt in her life. 12 years of dedication meant nothing. The cases she had solved were forgotten. The families she had helped had moved on with their lives. Even her neighbors looked at her differently after seeing the news reports. She had become the detective who lost her mind and let a child killer escape. But Sarah wasn't broken. She was angry. Every news report about Vincent Crawford made her more determined. Every interview with his victims' families fueled her resolve. The police department had given up on catching Crawford. They had moved on to other cases, other priorities. But Sarah knew Crawford better than anyone else. She had studied his patterns, understood his methods, and came closer to catching him than anyone ever had. Late that night, Sarah opened her laptop and began typing an email. She had remembered something from her early days as a detective. There was one person who might be able to help her, someone the entire law enforcement community respected but could never control. She had worked with him once briefly, on a case that no one else could solve. He operated outside the system, answering to no one, and had a reputation for catching criminals that regular police couldn't touch. Sarah had never thought she would need to reach out to someone like him. She had always believed in working within the system, following rules and trusting her team. But her team had abandoned her, the system had failed her, and the rules had protected the wrong people. Now she needed someone who didn't play by any rules at all. She needed the one man no one could catch, and she hoped he would remember her from their brief encounter years ago. The abandoned coffee shop on the outskirts of the city looked like it had been closed for years. Broken windows were covered with newspapers, and weeds grew through cracks in the parking lot. Sarah checked her phone again. The message had been simple. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., Old Murphy's Coffee on Route 9. Come alone. She had sent her email 3 days ago and hadn't expected any response at all. Sarah pushed open the front door, which creaked loudly in the silence. Inside, dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through dirty windows. Most of the furniture was gone, but a few tables and chairs remained scattered around the empty space. She chose a table near the back and waited, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. Detective Martinez. The voice came from behind her. Sarah spun around to see a tall man in his 40s stepping out of the shadows near the back wall. He wore simple clothes, dark jeans and a gray jacket, but moved with the confidence of someone who was completely in control. His hair was black, with touches of gray at the temples, and his eyes seemed to take in everything about her in a single glance. "It's just Sarah now," she said, standing up. "I'm not a detective anymore." Marcus Kane nodded slowly. She remembered him from 5 years ago when they had worked together on the Morrison kidnapping case. Even then, he had been a mystery. No one knew his real background, but everyone knew his reputation. He found people that others couldn't find, and solved cases that seemed impossible. "I read about what happened," Marcus said, sitting down across from her. "Your team threw you under the bus." His voice was calm, but there was something dangerous in his tone. Vincent Crawford is still out there because they cared more about following rules than catching a killer. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and surprise that someone finally understood what had really happened. "The department destroyed my life," Sarah said, her hands clenched on the table. 12 years of service, and they made me look like a crazy woman who endangered children. Marcus studied her face carefully. "You're not crazy, Sarah, you're angry, and you should be." He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me about Crawford." For the next hour, Sarah told Marcus everything she knew about Vincent Crawford. She showed him the files she had compiled, the timeline she had created, and the pattern she had discovered connecting multiple disappearances across different states. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally asking specific questions about dates, locations, or Crawford's methods. "You were right about everything," Marcus said when she finished. "Crawford isn't just a random predator. He's organized, patient, and smart. The warehouse wasn't his main operation. It was just a temporary location. He pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah several photographs. I've been tracking him since he disappeared that night. He's changed his appearance, his name and his location, but not his methods. Sarah stared at the photos. They showed a man who looked different from Vincent Crawford but had the same build and posture. How did you find him when the entire police department couldn't? She asked. Marcus smiled slightly. I don't have to worry about jurisdiction, warrants, or departmental politics. I can go places and do things that regular cops can't. What do you mean? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Let's just say I have resources that aren't available through official channels. I can access information that would take police departments months to obtain legally. I can move around without anyone tracking my activities. Sarah realized she was sitting across from someone who operated completely outside the law. Everything she had believed in as a police officer told her to walk away. But the faces of Emma Thompson and the other missing children filled her mind. What do you need from me? She asked. Your knowledge, Marcus replied immediately. You understand Crawford better than anyone else. You know how he thinks, where he might go, and what his next move could be. But more than that, you want him caught as much as I do. He paused. The question is, are you willing to work outside the system that betrayed you? Sarah thought about her former colleagues who had turned against her. She remembered Captain Williams refusing to send backup when she had found Crawford. She pictured Vincent Crawford walking free while more children disappeared. What would we be doing exactly? She asked. Hunting him, Marcus said simply. We'll use every method available to track him down and stop him permanently. But I need to be clear about something. This won't be like police work. We won't be following procedure or building a case for court. We'll be operating in a gray area that your training never prepared you for. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but also a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in months. How do we start? Marcus smiled, and for the first time Sarah saw something warm in his expression. We start by understanding that Crawford made a mistake when he let you get close to him. He knows you're the only one who figured out his pattern. Right now, he's probably watching the news, reading about your dismissal, and feeling safe. He thinks you're finished. But I'm not finished, Sarah said, feeling strength return to her voice. Marcus nodded. Exactly. And now he has to deal with both of us. The difference is he knows your methods from your police work, but he has no idea who I am or what I'm capable of. He stood up from the table. Are you ready to disappear for a while, Sarah? Because once we start this, there's no going back to your old life. Sarah thought about her empty apartment, her destroyed reputation, and her former colleagues who had abandoned her. There's nothing left of my old life, she said. Crawford and my department made sure of that. She stood up and extended her hand to Marcus. When do we leave? Marcus shook her hand, his grip firm and confident. Tonight. I have a safe house about 2 hours from here. We'll work from there while we plan our next move. He handed her a cell phone. This is encrypted. Use it to stay in contact, but don't contact anyone from your old life. As far as the world is concerned, Sarah Martinez has disappeared. As they walked toward the exit, Sarah felt like she was stepping into a completely different world. Everything she had known about law enforcement and justice was behind her now. She was partnering with a man who operated by his own rules, and she had no idea where this path would lead. But for the first time since the warehouse incident, she felt hope. Vincent Crawford had destroyed her career and her reputation. But he had also made a powerful enemy. Now that enemy had an ally who played by no rules at all. The safe house was nothing like Sarah had expected. Hidden deep in the woods, it looked like an ordinary cabin from the outside. But inside was filled with the most advanced technology she had ever seen. Multiple computer screens lined one wall, showing maps, surveillance footage, and data streams from sources she didn't recognize. Communication equipment hummed quietly in the corner, and a large table was covered with files, photographs, and documents. Welcome to my mobile headquarters, Marcus said, watching Sarah's amazed expression. I move locations every few months, but the setup stays the same. He gestured toward the screens. Right now, I'm monitoring Vincent Crawford's activities in real time. Sarah walked closer and saw dozens of photos of a man who looked very different from the Vincent Crawford she remembered, but the eyes were the same. He's calling himself David Morrison now, Marcus explained, pointing to identification documents on the screen. He's working as a security guard at a shopping mall in Phoenix, Arizona. Perfect job for someone who wants to watch families with children. Sarah felt her stomach turn. How long has he been there? She asked. 3 weeks, Marcus replied. Just long enough to learn the routines and identify potential targets. He pulled up a map showing the mall's layout. He's been very careful since escaping from you. He's changed everything about his appearance and background, but his fundamental behavior patterns are the same. Sarah studied the surveillance footage showing Crawford at his security post, watching shoppers walk by. We need to stop him before he takes another child, Sarah said, her voice tight with urgency. Marcus nodded. That's exactly what we're going to do. But we need to be smarter than the police department was. We can't just arrest him and hope the legal system works. Crawford has proven he can escape from custody and disappear completely. Sarah understood what Marcus was implying, and it made her uncomfortable. What are you suggesting we do? Marcus pulled up another screen showing Crawford's daily routine. We're going to make sure he never hurts another child again. Permanently. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. You're talking about killing him, Sarah said quietly. Marcus looked at her directly. I'm talking about stopping a predator who has already proven he can escape from prison and continue hurting children. Your way of doing things, following procedure, building legal cases hoping the system works, that approach already failed. Crawford is free because of that approach. Sarah walked to the window and stared out at the dark forest. Everything in her police training told her that what Marcus was suggesting was wrong, but she also knew that Crawford would keep taking children until someone stopped him permanently. There has to be another way, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Is there? Marcus asked, joining her at the window. Let's say we capture Crawford and turn him over to the police. What happens then? He gets a lawyer, claims his rights were violated because we captured him illegally, and potentially gets released on a technicality. Even if he goes to trial, he could escape again or get out on parole eventually. How many children suffer while we hope the system works? Sarah knew Marcus was right, but accepting his solution meant crossing a line she had never imagined crossing. I became a police officer to protect people, she said, but I also believed in justice, not revenge. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I understand your conflict, Sarah, but sometimes justice and the legal system aren't the same thing. Over the next few days, Sarah learned more about Marcus's background and methods. He had been a military special forces operator for 15 years before becoming what he called a private problem solver. He worked for people who had been failed by the traditional justice system, parents whose children's killers had been released on technicalities, families whose loved ones had been murdered by people who couldn't be touched by law enforcement. I don't take every case, Marcus explained as they reviewed Crawford's file together. I only work with people who have genuinely been failed by the system and who have exhausted every legal option. He showed Sarah testimonials from grateful families whose problems he had solved. These people couldn't get justice any other way. Sarah began to understand that Marcus operated in a world she had never known existed. He had contacts in intelligence agencies, criminal organizations, and law enforcement departments around the world. He could obtain information that would be impossible for regular police to access. He could move across international borders without being tracked. He was, in every sense, the one man no one could catch. But what impressed Sarah most was Marcus's precision and planning. He didn't act impulsively or emotionally. Every move was calculated and based on extensive research. Crawford isn't my first predator, Marcus told her one evening as they watched surveillance footage. I've stopped 12 others who were beyond the reach of traditional law enforcement. Not one of them has hurt another child. Sarah found herself drawn into Marcus's world despite her reservations. She contributed her knowledge of Crawford's psychology and helped plan their approach. They studied his new identity, his work schedule, and his living situation. They identified his likely targets and began predicting his next moves. Working with Marcus was like working with the most capable partner she had ever had. "Why did you agree to help me?" Sarah asked one night as they took a break from planning. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Because you were the only police officer who truly understood what Crawford was. You risked everything to stop him, and your own department destroyed you for it. That kind of dedication deserves support. And because you know I was right about him," Sarah added. Marcus smiled slightly. "That too. You saw patterns that trained investigators missed. You connected cases across multiple states that no one else had linked together. You're not just angry about what happened to you. You're genuinely committed to stopping Crawford." As their partnership developed, Sarah realized she was changing. The rules and procedures that had guided her entire career began to seem less important than results. Watching Crawford's surveillance footage, seeing him study potential victims, knowing that children were in danger while police departments failed to act, it all made Marcus's approach seem more reasonable. "I'm ready," Sarah said one morning, surprising herself with the words. Marcus looked up from the computer screens. "Ready for what?" he asked, though she could see in his eyes that he already knew. "Ready to stop Crawford permanently," she said. "Ready to make sure he never hurts another child." Marcus nodded slowly. "Once we cross this line, Sarah, everything changes. You won't be able to go back to your old life or your old way of thinking about justice." Sarah thought about Emma Thompson, about the other children Crawford had taken, about the ones he would take in the future if they didn't stop him. "My old life is already gone," she said. "Crawford and my department made sure of that. Now it's time to make sure Crawford's life is gone too." Phoenix, Arizona was blazing hot even in October. Sarah adjusted her sunglasses and checked her watch as she sat in the rental car across from Sunset Valley Mall. For 3 days, she and Marcus had been watching Crawford's routine, learning his patterns, and waiting for the perfect opportunity. Crawford arrived for his security shift at exactly 2 p.m. every day, patrolled the same routes, and took his breaks at precisely the same times. "He's getting comfortable," Marcus said through the earpiece Sarah wore. "That's exactly what we want." Marcus was positioned on the mall's second floor, disguised as a maintenance worker observing Crawford's interactions with shoppers. He's been watching the Chen family for 2 days now. The mother brings her 6-year-old daughter here every Tuesday and Thursday, while her older son has soccer practice. Sarah felt her jaw clench. Mrs. Chen had no idea that the friendly security guard who always waved at her daughter was actually a predator studying his next victim.
"How much longer do we wait?" she asked quietly into her microphone. "He's going to make his move soon," Marcus replied. "Crawford never watches a target for more than a week before acting." The plan they had developed was complex but necessary.
They couldn't simply grab Crawford in public. Too many witnesses and security cameras. They needed to isolate him in a location where they could work without interruption. Marcus had identified the perfect spot, the mall's loading dock area, which Crawford checked every night after closing as part of his security rounds. "Remember, we need him to believe this is a routine encounter at first," Marcus said, as they reviewed the plan one final time. "Sarah, you'll approach him as a former police officer who wants to talk about the Thompson case. He'll be curious enough to listen, especially since he thinks you've been disgraced and removed from law enforcement. That gives us the opening we need." Sarah understood her role perfectly. Crawford would see her as no threat, just a washed-up ex-cop trying to relive her glory days. He had read about her dismissal in the news, and probably enjoyed knowing that his escape had destroyed her career. That arrogance would be his downfall. At 11:30 p.m., Sarah positioned herself near the loading dock entrance. Marcus was already inside the building, having disabled the security cameras in that section earlier in the evening. Crawford would make his final patrol round in 15 minutes, and everything would be decided then. Sarah's heart pounded as she heard footsteps approaching. Crawford appeared around the corner, flashlight in hand, looking exactly like the professional security guard he pretended to be. When he saw Sarah standing by the door, he stopped immediately, his hand moving toward the radio on his belt. "Hello," Vincent? Sarah said calmly, using his real name deliberately. Crawford's eyes widened with recognition, but he quickly tried to recover his composure. I think you have me confused with someone else, he said. But his voice betrayed his nervousness. My name is David Morrison. We both know that's not true, Sarah replied, stepping closer. Vincent Crawford, wanted for child abduction, escaped from police custody 6 months ago. She pulled out a folder containing his real identification. Photos. I've been tracking you since Phoenix, Vincent. Did you really think changing your appearance and name would fool everyone? Crawford glanced around quickly, looking for escape routes. You're not a police officer anymore, he said, his confidence returning slightly. I read about what happened to you. Your own department threw you out for being unstable. He smiled coldly. Even if you're right about who I am, what are you going to do about it? Call the same cops who destroyed your career? Actually, I have a different plan, Sarah said, pulling out a gun. Crawford's smile disappeared immediately. I'm not here to arrest you, Vincent. I'm here to make sure you never hurt another child. Crawford raised his hands slowly, but Sarah could see him calculating his options. He was bigger and stronger than her, and if he could get close enough, he might be able to overpower her. You won't shoot me, Crawford said, taking a small step forward. You're one of the good cops, remember? You follow rules, you believe in justice, you don't execute people in parking lots. He took another step. Besides, there are cameras everywhere. You'll go to prison for murder. The cameras in this area have been disabled, Marcus said, stepping out of the shadows behind Crawford. Crawford spun around, realizing he was trapped between them. And Sarah isn't the same person she was 6 months ago. You made sure of that when you destroyed her career. Crawford's face went pale as he recognized that he was in serious danger. Listen, we can work something out, he said, his voice shaking slightly. I have money hidden away. I can pay you both to walk away and forget you found me. Marcus laughed coldly. You think this is about money? This is about justice, Vincent. The kind of justice that the legal system failed to deliver. You can't just murder me, Crawford said desperately. I have rights. There has to be a trial, evidence, due process. Sarah felt a surge of anger. You're talking about rights? What rights did Emma Thompson have when you kidnapped her? What rights did the other children have when you destroyed their lives? Crawford tried to run, but Marcus was ready for him. In seconds, Crawford was on the ground, his hands zip-tied behind his back. This isn't how justice works, Crawford said, breathing heavily. You're both going to regret this. The police will investigate my disappearance. They'll find evidence. That leads back to you. No, they won't, Marcus said matter-of-factly. By tomorrow morning, David Morrison will have simply vanished. His apartment will be empty, his bank accounts closed, his identity erased. No one will even know to look for Vincent Crawford, because officially, Vincent Crawford died in a car accident in Nevada 3 weeks ago. Sarah stared at Marcus in amazement. You've already created a false death certificate. Marcus nodded. I told you I have resources that regular law enforcement doesn't have. Crawford's old identity is officially dead, and his new identity is about to disappear completely. As far as the world is concerned, Vincent Crawford is already gone. Crawford looked back and forth between them, finally understanding that they had planned this down to the smallest detail. Please, he whispered. I'll confess to everything. I'll tell you where to find evidence about all the children. I'll cooperate completely if you just turn me over to the police. Too late for that, Sarah said, surprised by how cold her own voice sounded. You had your chance to confess when I caught you at the warehouse. Instead, you escaped and put more children at risk. Now the only way to protect those children is to make sure you can never hurt them. Marcus checked his watch. We need to finish this, he said quietly. The night shift security supervisor makes his rounds in 20 minutes. Sarah nodded, understanding that the time for conversation was over. She looked down at Crawford, who was crying now, begging for his life. For just a moment, Sarah hesitated. This wasn't how she had imagined her life as a law enforcement officer would go. She had wanted to protect people and serve justice, not execute criminals in empty parking lots. But then she thought about Emma Thompson's frightened face when they found her in the warehouse. She thought about the other children Crawford had taken and the ones he would take in the future if they let him live. Sarah raised her gun and made her choice. Some decisions couldn't be undone, and some lines couldn't be uncrossed. But sometimes real justice required going beyond the law. 3 months after Phoenix, Sarah found herself in a completely different world. She and Marcus had traveled to 6 different cities, stopping predators that law enforcement couldn't touch. Each case was different, but the pattern was always the same. People who had been failed by the traditional justice system reaching out to Marcus for help, and Marcus delivering permanent solutions. Sarah had changed in ways she never thought possible. The woman who had once filled out detailed reports and followed every procedure was gone. In her place was someone who could make life or death decisions without hesitation and sleep peacefully afterward. She had crossed the line that separated law enforcement from vigilante justice, and she discovered that she didn't regret it at all. "We've got a new case," Marcus said one morning as they sat in their latest safe house, a converted warehouse in Detroit. He handed Sarah a thick file. "This one's different from the others." Sarah opened the file and found herself looking at photographs of her former colleagues from the police department. Detective Mike Rodriguez, Captain Williams, and 3 other officers who had testified against her during the internal investigation. "I don't understand," Sarah said, confused. "These are police officers, not criminals." Marcus pointed to a section of the file. "Read the investigative report," he said quietly. "It turns out your former colleagues have been running their own operation for years." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she read the documents. Her former partner, Mike Rodriguez, had been selling drugs confiscated during raids. Captain Williams had been taking bribes from organized crime families. The other officers had been involved in evidence tampering and witness intimidation. "How did you find this out?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus sat down across from her. "I've been investigating them since your dismissal. Something about how quickly they turned against you didn't feel right. Officers don't usually abandon a good cop that easily unless they have something to hide." He pulled up additional files on his laptop. "It took 3 months, but I finally found their connection." Sarah stared at the evidence in disbelief. "They destroyed my career to protect their own criminal operation," she said slowly. "The Thompson case wasn't about my methods or my mental state. It was about me getting too close to discovering their corruption." Marcus nodded grimly. "Crawford's escape gave them the perfect opportunity to discredit you before you could expose them." The betrayal cut deeper than anything Sarah had experienced. She had trusted these people with her life for years. She had considered Mike Rodriguez her closest friend. Captain Williams had been like a father figure to her. Now she learned that they had destroyed her reputation and career to protect their criminal enterprise. "What do you want to do about this?" Marcus asked, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. Sarah looked at the photographs of her former colleagues, feeling a cold anger spreading through her chest. "The same thing we did to Crawford," she said without hesitation. "They're criminals who have been protected by their badges for too long." But Marcus shook his head. "This case is different, Sarah. These aren't predators who hurt children. They're corrupt cops, but they're not murderers or kidnappers. The punishment has to fit the crime." Sarah felt disappointed. "So we just expose them and hope the Internal Affairs Department does something?" "Not exactly," Marcus said with a slight smile. "We're going to destroy their lives the same way they destroyed yours, but we're going to let them live with the consequences." He showed Sarah a detailed plan he had already developed. "By the time we're finished, they'll lose their jobs, their pensions, their reputations, and their freedom, but they'll be alive to experience every moment of their downfall." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus and Sarah orchestrated the most complex operation they had ever attempted. Using Marcus's network of contacts, they arranged for evidence of the officers' crimes to be delivered to federal investigators, internal affairs, and several news organizations simultaneously. They made sure the evidence couldn't be suppressed or covered up by corrupt officials. Sarah found herself excited about the prospect of watching her former colleagues face justice. "I want to be there when they get arrested," she told Marcus as they prepared for the final phase of their plan. "I want to see their faces when they realize their world is falling apart." Marcus understood her desire for revenge, but he also sensed something concerning in her enthusiasm. The arrests happened exactly as Marcus had predicted. Detective Rodriguez was taken into custody during a family barbecue, handcuffed in front of his wife and children. Captain Williams was arrested at the police station, led away in handcuffs while his subordinates watched in shock. The other officers were picked up at their homes, their mugshots broadcast on every local news channel. Sarah watched the arrests from a rented apartment across the street from the police station. She felt a deep satisfaction as she saw Captain Williams being led to a police car in handcuffs. "How does it feel to be on the other side of the law?" she whispered to herself. Marcus sat beside her, watching her reaction more than the arrests themselves. "Are you satisfied?" Marcus asked after the last officer was taken away. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "This is perfect justice. They're going to experience exactly what they put me through, except their guilt is real." But as the days passed and the news coverage continued, Sarah found herself wanting more than just their arrests. "They'll probably get reduced sentences," she said one evening as they watched the news reports. "Rodriguez will claim he was helping his sick mother pay medical bills. Williams will say he was just following orders. They'll all get sympathy from juries and be out of prison in a few years." Marcus could hear the frustration in her voice. "Maybe," Marcus said carefully, "but their careers are over, their families are destroyed, and they'll never be trusted again. Sometimes that's enough punishment." Sarah shook her head. "It's not enough. They destroyed 12 years of my life to protect their crimes. They should pay with their lives the same way Crawford did." Marcus realized that Sarah had changed more than he had anticipated. The line between justice and revenge had become blurred for her. "Sarah, we can't treat every case the same way. Crawford was a child predator who would have continued hurting innocent victims. Your former colleagues are criminals, but they're not killers." "They killed my career," Sarah replied angrily. "They killed my reputation and my future. Why should they get to live comfortable lives in minimum security prisons, while I can never go back to law enforcement?" Marcus could see that Sarah's anger was consuming her judgment. The woman who had once believed in proportional justice was now driven purely by vengeance. "Because that's not who we are," Marcus said firmly. "We stop people who can't be stopped any other way. We don't execute everyone who wrongs us." Sarah stared at him in surprise. "So there are lines you won't cross?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, there are." 1 year after Sarah had first contacted Marcus, they received a case that would change everything. The file arrived through Marcus's encrypted network, but this time it wasn't about a criminal they needed to stop. It was about Sarah herself, and it came from an unexpected source: Emma Thompson's mother. "Mrs. Thompson wants to meet with you," Marcus said, showing Sarah the message on his secure tablet. "She says she has information about Vincent Crawford that she never told the police." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't spoken to any member of the Thompson family since her dismissal from the police force. What could she possibly know that she didn't tell investigators? The meeting was arranged at a small diner in Emma's hometown. Sarah arrived first, choosing a booth in the back corner where they could speak privately. When Mrs. Thompson walked in, Sarah barely recognized her. The woman who had once been vibrant and energetic now looked exhausted and haunted. Emma's kidnapping had aged her mother 10 years and 18 months. "Detective Martinez," Mrs. Thompson said, sitting down across from Sarah. "I know you're not with the police anymore, but you'll always be the detective who saved my daughter." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm the reason Crawford escaped. If I had followed procedure, he would have been captured that night." Mrs. Thompson shook her head firmly. "That's not true, and that's not why I wanted to see you." She pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on the table. "After Crawford was killed in that car accident in Nevada, I thought our nightmare was finally over. But then I found something in Emma's room that changed everything." Sarah opened the envelope and found a series of photographs that made her blood run cold. They showed Crawford watching the Thompson family weeks before Emma's kidnapping, but these weren't surveillance photos taken by law enforcement. They were personal photos that Crawford had taken himself, like trophies of his planning process. Emma had hidden these under her mattress, Mrs. Thompson explained. She was too scared to tell anyone, even after we found her. She said the bad man had shown her these pictures and told her he had been watching her family for a long time. Sarah studied the photos more carefully and noticed something that made her stomach drop. In the background of several photos, she could see Detective Mike Rodriguez's car parked across the street from the Thompson house. In another photo, Captain Williams was visible talking to Crawford near a coffee shop. "Mrs. Thompson," Sarah said slowly, "did you show these pictures to the police department?" "I tried to," Mrs. Thompson replied. "But when I brought them to the station, I was told that Detective Rodriguez and Captain Williams were no longer with the department. The officer I spoke with said they had been arrested for corruption and that any evidence related to their cases was being reviewed by federal investigators." Sarah realized that the corruption of her former colleagues went much deeper than Marcus had discovered. They hadn't just been taking bribes and selling drugs. They had been actively working with Vincent Crawford. "Did Crawford ever mention knowing any police officers?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Thompson nodded. "Emma told me that Crawford said he had friends in the police department who would make sure he never got caught. She didn't understand what he meant at the time, but now—" She gestured toward the photographs. "It's clear that Rodriguez and Williams were helping him." Sarah felt like pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. Her former colleagues hadn't just destroyed her career to protect their criminal activities. They had betrayed her because she was getting too close to exposing their partnership with Crawford. "That's why they refused to send backup when I called from the warehouse," she said to herself. "There's more," Mrs. Thompson said quietly. "Emma remembers Crawford talking about other police officers in other cities. He bragged about having protection wherever he went." She handed Sarah another envelope. "These are the names and locations Emma remembered. I thought you should have them, since you're the only person who ever really tried to stop Crawford." Sarah opened the second envelope and found a list of police officers in 6 different states, along with notes about crimes that had been covered up or investigations that had been deliberately sabotaged. The network of corruption was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. "Mrs. Thompson, why are you giving this to me instead of the FBI?" Sarah asked. "Because the FBI moves slowly, and children are still in danger," Mrs. Thompson replied. "I know what you and your partner have been doing. I know that Crawford didn't really die in a car accident in Nevada." Sarah's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said carefully. Mrs. Thompson smiled sadly. "Detective Martinez, I'm not stupid. Crawford's body was never found after that supposed accident. No one ever claimed his personal effects. And suddenly children stopped disappearing in the pattern that Crawford had established. Even if what you're suggesting were true, I couldn't confirm or deny it," Sarah said. But she could see that Mrs. Thompson already knew the truth. "I don't want confirmation," Mrs. Thompson replied. "I want you to know that some people understand what you've been doing and why you've been doing it." Mrs. Thompson stood up to leave, but paused at the edge of the booth. "The children you've saved will never know your name or thank you personally. Their parents will never understand the danger they were in or how close they came to losing everything. But you've given those families something precious. The ability to sleep peacefully, without knowing they needed to be afraid." After Mrs. Thompson left, Sarah sat alone in the diner for nearly an hour, processing what she had learned. The corruption she and Marcus had exposed was just the tip of an iceberg. Crawford hadn't been operating alone. He had been protected by a network of corrupt officials across multiple states. Sarah called Marcus using their encrypted phone. "We have a new case," she said. "Actually, we have 6 new cases, and they're all connected to Crawford." She explained about the photographs and the list of corrupt officers. Marcus listened without interrupting, but she could hear the tension in his silence. "This changes everything," Marcus said when she finished. "If Crawford had protection from police departments across multiple states, then there are probably other predators operating under the same protection." Sarah felt a familiar surge of determination. "Then we need to find them all." Over the next several months, Sarah and Marcus systematically worked their way through Mrs. Thompson's list. Each corrupt officer they investigated led to new discoveries about covered-up crimes and protected criminals. They found predators who had been operating for years under police protection, evidence that had been destroyed to prevent prosecutions, and victims who had been silenced or discredited. The work was more dangerous than anything they had done before. They weren't just hunting individual criminals. They were dismantling an organized network of corruption that had roots in law enforcement agencies across the country. Some of the officers they investigated were genuinely surprised by what they learned and agreed to cooperate. Others fought back with resources and connections that made them formidable opponents. But Sarah and Marcus had advantages that traditional law enforcement lacked. They could operate across jurisdictions without bureaucratic delays. They could use methods that would be illegal for police officers. Most importantly, they could make permanent solutions to problems that the legal system couldn't solve. "Do you ever regret leaving the police force?" Marcus asked one evening as they planned their approach to a particularly dangerous corrupt network in Texas. Sarah thought about the question carefully. "I regret losing my faith in the system," she said finally. "But I don't regret finding a way to protect people outside that system." Marcus nodded. "The work we do isn't perfect and it's not always clean. But at the end of the day, children are safe because we do it." Sarah looked at the files spread across their table. Dozens of cases they had solved, hundreds of potential victims they had protected, and families who could sleep peacefully without ever knowing why. "Mrs. Thompson was right," Sarah said. "The people we protect will never know our names or thank us personally. But that doesn't make the work less important." She picked up the next case file. "Besides, I'd rather be unknown and effective than famous and useless." As they prepared for their next operation, Sarah reflected on how far she had come from the rule-following detective who had been abandoned by her team. She had found something better than her old career. She had found a partner who shared her commitment to justice and a mission that made a real difference in the world. The system had failed her, but she had not failed the people who needed protection most.